everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Based here for real now. We just got a car, and we're getting a dog. So yes, we've lived here for 2 years, but I think we're here for real now. I've built a little bit of a studio here in Los Angeles. There's a signed drawing of Nightcrawler on the wall. All right, hey, what's up? Hey, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, that was a strange intro, but I guess that lets you know who I am as a host. This is a very good episode, by the way. This is Alexander Noice, and if you don't know who Alex is, let me read you his bio. Based in Los Angeles, Alex is a composer, guitarist, producer, and band leader who has toured the world performing with many notable artists from Charlie Hayden to Art Ensemble of Chicago's Famadou Don Moy. From 2008 to 2013, he led the highly revered art rock / punk trio Falsetto Teeth, and in 2016, he released his first solo electronic album called Music Made with Voices. His newest project is simply called Noice, and their self-titled debut album was just released last week on Arenda Records. I think it's fantastic. I'm not great at genre boundaries, but I told Alex that it reminded me a lot of the Rock in Opposition stuff, like a lot of the avant rock of the 1970s, and it's very minimalist too. Those are my two sweet spots when it comes to music. In fact, why don't I play a song of his before we go into the interview? But I heard the album and I was like, this is great. And what? He lives in Los Angeles? Oh boy, let's talk. And we get into a lot of interesting things. I'll say this. I had a lot of preconceptions about Alex going into this, just based on the music he makes. And they were all wrong. And you'll find out perhaps why. Ooh. Do you like that? Do you like the tension I set up with the foreshadowing? By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. If you want to listen to more episodes, you can get them all on Spotify. You can get them all at beginnings.libsyn.com if you want to download them as opposed to stream them. I'm old, so I like downloading stuff to my phone. Now, if you don't want to get them all, maybe you just want to browse, but maybe I could suggest a couple for you here. Now, Alex plays avant rock. Maybe you might be interested in some other people who have done that and that I've interviewed on the show, including Weasel Walter, Ardo Lindsay, Kid Millions from Oneida, David Harrington from Kronos Quartet has been on the show before. Who else? Colin Newman from Wire. A bunch of other people, including not just musicians, but artists, both visual and other, writers, TV writers, authors, actors, comedians, miscellaneous. But if you like what you heard and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, a bunch of other places. And if you want to find me on social media, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckerman. Got some great episodes coming up, including Red Cross, Poonam Patel from the wonderful Netflix show Special, Vagabond, Magdalene Visaggio, the great comics writer. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let me play a song from Alex's latest album, Noice. I think this is the single. It's called Black Darwin. It's one of my favorite songs on the album. And then right after that, my talk with Alex. So without any further ado, from the album Noice, here is Black Darwin. I couldn't find really any information about you online.
There's not a lot on there.
When we were talking in the kitchen before, you said you're from Montana.
Yeah.
And it's so... I immediately like jumped into like my empathy mode where I tried to imagine. I don't even know where in Montana.
Kalispell, but yeah, a lot of times people think I'm like from a ranch or something, But I mean, yeah, it's a huge state. I mean, but I'm from Kalispell, which is like Glacier National Park area. It's like the northwestern corner, so it's Canadian temperatures, cold most of the time, but then pretty gorgeous and serene during the summer. But it's funny, I actually haven't been back there since I was 17, so however long that is, 15 years about, but I'm going back for the first time this summer, so that'll be kind of interesting.
I mean, literally, when you said Montana, all I imagined was you standing in a giant field. And I'm like,
that's what I think of it when haven't been there for so long, so I imagine, I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, it's just like more cows than humans. At least there was for a bit. I'm sure it's gotten more populated, since I left. But when I did, that was the case. Maybe not.
Haven't been there by choice, or haven't been there by like your family moved away, and so there's no real reason to go back.
Well, no. I don't have like any apprehension of like trying to or I'm not like avoiding it or anything. But it's just if you're hustling here and then it just hasn't. I've been intending on going back for several summers. No one lives there anymore except for my half brother, and he actually has a nice place up there. So I don't know why I haven't taken advantage of it before to like actually visit and get out of the city, because it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. That will be me in a field probably, and that's. But it's not. Yeah, it's not like a. Yeah, it just kind of the years just passed by, and then before I knew, I was like, oh God, it's been like 15 years since I've been up there. So, but I mean, and I moved out when I was fairly young. I was 12 when I moved to LA, so it's not like my life got kind of formed here. So it's not like I have a ton of friends that I go back and visit and see how they're growing up or whatever.
So right around like puberty, when you're trying to figure out who you are, you move from Montana.
Right before that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's like culturally just like it was vastly different, and I went from pretty much nothing but like white people kind of and even though I didn't grow up in a field, but it was like fairly barren comparatively to coming to LA. And I go here, and like the first school I go to is like 90% Korean, and like people like most of the time are talking to each other in Korean. So felt like very like a huge shift. But we did a lot of hopping around when we first moved here. So in all ethnically diverse neighborhoods. So I adapted really quick. But it is like, it's like at that like, fairly naive age, you don't, you just kind of get thrown into, you're like, okay, got to figure out how to navigate through it while, your hormonal shifts are happening in conjunction with it. So yeah, it was good. I mean, I think it happened right at a good age, because like for like a kid, like up until that point living in Montana, it's actually pretty ideal. It's like, the winters are fun when you're a kid, like playing in the snow. And then before you kind of really gather much culture or whatever, or have your own specific interests, then I got moved to LA, which has like just tons to kind of explore. And
I mean, do you think you formed as a person? I'm trying to think back to like my own childhood, and I'm like, I was pretty formed. Like I didn't have I didn't have a confident identity, but I think like I was formed as a weird person in my early days.
Yeah, I haven't been able to really tap into those memories as well. Like I have certain vivid ones when I'm very young, but I guess a lot of it's like I associate like with my like musical identity, or my identity in arts in general, like got formed here, but like I think probably behavioral traits for sure were formed, when I was like when most people form them at that age, so, but I don't know, it's hard for me to kind of tap into that process or that development at that age. I can tap into memories a lot easier. At least more personal, like introspective memories of like, oh, maybe that's why I behave this way now because of this thing that happened. Like later on, like when I was like, around that 11, 12, 13. So I'm not sure, but I think you're right. I think that's like, I was definitely like an oddball kid, but like that was heightened much more so when I came here as well. Also because I was like fairly, we moved a lot when we first came here, so I was kind of hopping around, so I couldn't really form much of like a peer group either. So, hence why I probably locked into like obsessively like music and like other things, which maybe, isn't a bad thing. I think that's like a through line with lots of kind of maybe creative folks. I don't know. I mean, but
it's different. The thing I found on the show,
you would know better. Like, yeah, you've talked to tons of people about it, but
there's almost no everyone's. I mean, this is so cliche. Everyone's journey is different. There really is.
Yeah.
There are like, I personally think that there has to be some kind of otherness to make good art. Mm-hmm. You have to have some kind of feeling of otherness, whatever that comes from. Mine, I always say, is that I was Jewish in a very Christian area of Pennsylvania. So I automatically, but like the more that I talk on the show, I'm like, I was kind of weird before I think I felt any outsider status from that. Right. I think I was like attracted to, and it may just be like a quirk of the culture my parents introduced me to when I was like 5 or 6 or whatever. I mean, I don't know. There's weird shit on TV when I was a kid.
Right.
There was Nickelodeon had weird shows on. Nickelodeon.
Are we the same? How old are you?
I'm 40.
Okay. I mean, I just turned 33, but yeah, I mean, they had like Ren and Stimpy, and that was like
I was already weird by the time. Ren and Stimpy like hit such a sweet spot in my brain. Yeah. But I was already weird by that time. I just showed Naomi this. It just came up in conversation. Oh no, we were scrolling on Netflix, and there was I guess they did a remake of this old show called The Tomorrow People, which was like a British show from the 70s that they replayed in the mid 80s on Nickelodeon, and it's a show about. It's basically like. They're basically like the X-Men. They have like psychic powers, these kids. Okay. And one episode there's these aliens that make a clone of Hitler. And then when the clone is defeated, the Hitler melts into this green muck, and an eyeball just like kind of scrolls down his face.
Oh my God.
Just like drips down his face. And I like that to me.
What era was this show made? Around like
it was in the 70s.
70s,
but it was like replayed on Nickelodeon in the 80s. And I'm like, oh, I was seeing shit like that all the time. Even like the Transformers is like a weird kind of. I mean, so I stopped myself I literally stopped myself halfway through the word weird, but like, because I'm like, is it? I guess it's kind of weird.
I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it was, yeah. I guess, yeah. I grew up on like, I watched a lot of Nickelodeon and shows like that, but like particularly Ren and Stimpy, But even like Rugrats was like kind of an odd show, or Rocko's Modern Life was like, and so that was like came out right when I was probably like 6. So, and my parents were fairly like carefree about anything I was consuming. So, and also I had like a neighbor friend who was like 2 years older than me, and he was pretty much unsupervised as well. So we just like, we watched like MTV at that time, which was like, so I mean, that's actually something I thought about. That was like, 7, 8, 9, watching MTV and all those kind of crazy music videos, that probably informed something. Not sure what, but
mid 90s. I mean, there was a time, I think Nirvana opened up a small area in the 90s where weirdness was okay in the mainstream. And there was like a moment where that stuff like flooded. We're almost like, I'm picturing now like, in Ghostbusters when they when the EPA guy shuts off the containment unit and all the ghosts flood out.
Right.
That was weirdness in the 90s. There was like a moment where Nirvana shut off the containment unit of normality, and weirdness flooded out.
Well, I remember there was like multiple Butthole Surfer music videos and stuff like that were like getting played like all the time. And then there was like weird shows. I can't remember it, but there was like a slew of very bizarre shows that they were airing at that time as well. I wish I could pinpoint it. It was like this odd variety show, but like it was like the Gong Show, but even more bizarre. And anyways, the name's escaping me. But
there was what was the cartoon? There was a Liquid Television, which was like a cartoon anthology of like strange cartoons on MTV.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. There's that too. Yeah, but even like Nickelodeon with their like gacked, like,
yes,
like stuff. I don't know, but yeah, it's as far as establishing like some sort of skewed, personality traits. I think that's especially like with like the slew of media getting thrown at you. It's inevitable that it's going to form something. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't been able to like really articulate like anything super vivid from that time, or at least in any way that I can like pinpoint it directly to like like some sort of adult behavior that I have now.
I mean, it's just I don't think there's a linear correspondence between that stuff. I think in general, it just like if you key into it as a kid, or if you to weird culture as a kid, it just generally makes in my head, it's just like a kind of like a blobby puddle that like you as an adult emerge out of this thing.
Yeah.
Or, something like, that's maybe the best metaphor I can think of. Because I'm just trying to, it's not like I watched Ren and Stimpy as a kid and now I create strange music, right? It's not that kind of one-to-one correspondence. It's more like I'm generally keyed into like the weirder parts. It has attuned me in a certain way to the weirder parts of culture. So that like when as a, in my 20s, when I encounter Peter Greenaway's movies, there's something about those movies that like appeals to me then because of, I got keyed into that.
The composer, Michael Reisman?
Nyman?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that kind of like his, like, especially, I would say this for me, like musically, the kind of music that appeals to me, I would say both pop songs and like modern composition. Then both of those things keyed me into like liking people like Steve Reich or liking people like Michael Noice, like that kind of like minimalist stuff.
Yeah.
Or your music, there's there's something about that, like those things that like attuned me in a certain way to like these things. Sure. I think that's the more true story about how we end up being the people we are and liking the things we like. Or making the things, in terms of like people who create culture, making the things we make.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a hodgepodge. Like I don't think anyone like, sets out to be like, okay, like in a very calculating way, like, oh, I'm going to combine this and this and this. I think if it's good or at least honest, it's very intuitive. You're just like, okay, and then you can kind of maybe step back afterwards and be like, oh, this is probably referencing maybe my infatuation with jazz during this time, or this is me being obsessed with like new wave, and it's like now I'm kind of melding them together. Oh, but then I got obsessed with like, whatever, Shostakovich in college, and so maybe there's that. But I think if it's done across like authentically, it's just like kind of subconsciously piecing these elements together and trying to make them sound somewhat, organic or individualistic. I mean, maybe not individualistic, but because even that seems like fairly calculating. But it's just
Well, I think when you are creating something that is just flowing out of you, as opposed to like calculatingly saying, I'm going to make X, Y, or Z. I'm going to make a song that references Ligeti, whatever. Pick your person that you're.
No,
like,
it's a much different process. Yeah, because I've had to do stuff where it's like, okay,
as an assignment.
Or just like for like pitching to like a music library or some like licensing thing. It's we want to write something in this vein, and here's the band reference, and it's like a much different thought process that. I mean, obviously, comparative, like, just being like, you're not really thinking. You get in that kind of flow state, and you're kind of like, in whatever kind of comes out of it is, fairly mysterious. Where the other ones completely are like, okay, left brain, boom, I know how to do this, and piece that, okay, oh, they want this, and I know how to do that trick.
Yeah, it's a skill versus an art.
Yeah, it's a craft, you know, but it's not like it's not like as creative. I mean, there's creativity involved with it, of course,
Sure.
but you're using the tools, you know, much more consciously.
You're not investing your ego in a way that I think I know the difference. When I'm writing something that I have to write this is so dumb, but when it's dumb because you don't get paid to do it. But like when you are, when some production company has a property and they're looking for writers to develop that property, you write a short pitch doc.
That property,
yeah, like they bought a book,
or
they
okay,
bought
a
magazine article now,
right.
something. I mean, it gets even dumber than that. The things that they'll buy, and so you write, this is my take on it, and then you hope that they'll hire you, and you do it for free. And when I do things like that, there's no, I don't mean to say this like I don't give a shit. That was the first thing I was about to say.
Yeah, but
I do because I want to get hired and I want to make something.
You give a shit for different reasons than when you're creating something out of your own pleasure. Yeah.
But if there's something that I'm like, this is something I'm excited about writing, it flows out of me in a different way than when I'm like, this is what this, like when I'm thinking about it almost, and it's not that I don't think about commercial applications or commercial aspects when I'm making something. Because I do live in Los Angeles and I do have to make a living.
And as maybe as esoteric as some of my stuff might sound, there's definitely like a pop lineage that's not maybe conscious, but it's like infused in it that kind of grounds it as well. Yeah,
but like in the other, but like when you're making something for someone or for a, you know, for what's the word I'm looking for? A job. That wasn't it, by the way. That's the first one.
That'll work.
When you're making something for someone for a job, it's just a different, like it's almost like the commercial aspects of it overshadow everything else, and you're just like, this is what I think they want, and this, or you're doing it for someone else as opposed to it flowing naturally out of you.
Sure.
And therefore, there's like less ego in it.
Yeah.
I'm babbling a little bit here, but I'm really trying to figure out the difference here between those two between something that you really invest your ego in and something that is just like
I think you're
craft.
hitting at it. I mean, the ego thing it didn't dawn on me, but you're completely right. I think, and not to. I mean, ego is often associated with like only a negative aspect, but it's actually just pretty ingrained in you no matter what, you know.
Yeah, I don't even mean it. I mean, like literally putting your.
But that's why it took me a second. I was like, actually, but if you kind of relate it in that sort of way, I think that's kind of getting at it pretty close. I mean, it's a similar sort of thing where there'll be like a cattle call of, like what you're saying with like a property right or they buy the rights to some sort of thing, and then they'll do a cattle call for like, tons of people, and you're hoping to get the job, and you're doing it well and trying to do a good job, and you are invested in it. But yeah, you're relying, I think, a lot more so. I think there's like a lot more childlike play involved with like the other one. There, you're drifting into water you're not familiar with yet, and searching for something. Unless you're like, I don't know. I think by and large that's a pretty consistent through line. Like if you're trying to do something that's fairly new to yourself, or just challenge yourself a little bit even. Whereas the other stuff, you're kind of like, okay, here's the toolkit, and I think I know how to piece it together. Where the other one, it's like I don't even know what tool I would use for this, or what even I'm trying to. It's just there's this fog, and you're just trying to kind of brush it away and try to kind of see a little bit clearer about what's going on. Yeah,
I like that metaphor.
Yeah.
I mean, were you, besides the media you are ingesting when you're a kid, what are there other things that make you a weird person or that push you apart from the other people, both in Montana and then when you move here to Los Angeles? I mean, why don't we just start with this? What's your life like in Montana? What do your parents do for a living? How did they end up in Montana? All that kind of stuff.
Well, how do they? My dad, he was 25 years older than my mom. So he had me very late in life. So he had a family prior to meeting my mom. He had 2 children. in Minnesota, and then kind of hopped around. And I think he was like in academia. He was like a fairly like a established college professor, and then I think he kind of hit a wall with that at a certain point, and it was like right around like kind of the 60s and whatnot. And I think he kind of went off the grid a little bit and kind of hopped around, and it's all very vague, and actually he's not around anymore, so I can't like pinpoint like what he was doing during this time. But out of that, he met my mom, and I think they met in Seattle initially, and I don't know. I think he had his former family. He raised them in Montana, I think, because he just liked it's a very beautiful area, and he's very like he's got a green thumb. He's like really likes kind of outdoorsy stuff, or did, and so they ended up there, and then he was teaching a bit then too, but he was also like, he would try these like just not work at all and try these like kind of crazy inventions, some of which were kind of okay ideas and some of which were fairly like, in retrospect, like fairly like silly like endeavors. And my mom was kind of like involved with it as well. Like she didn't really have like consistent work either. So there would be this kind of this back and forth of, he'd teach for a bit and then he'd like kind of go and try doing some like work in some sort of like, entrepreneurial way, and then kind of get spit back around and kind of find, another teaching job or whatever. And so, that's, yeah, and they stayed together up until like, later in life. And so they were very much like super close, as far as their relationship at that time was. And so, I guess that, and then he had the family there. So me, my 3 other siblings, and I'm the youngest one of them all. And so, yeah, and then we moved to LA, I guess, for an endeavor my mom wanted to pursue. And so it's,
hold on, let's go back. I want to unpack some of the stuff. What was your dad's discipline?
He was an anatomy and physiology teacher.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So did that lead to, like, was he like creating medical devices? Or?
He did do that eventually, but he was also just doing like crazy shit. Like he went in on this with this partnership to create what's called a jump-a-hoop, which is like a hula hoop, but you jump it like a jump rope, which is like, and no offense, because he's a brilliant man, but it was like the dumbest like kind of endeavor. I was like, and like
there
as
were
an adult,
toys like that in the 80s and 90s.
You're right, and totally. And so maybe like I'm being a bit of a
Skip It. Do you remember Skip It?
Oh yeah, with the thing the ball and then you wrap it around your ankle and kind of skip. Yeah. So so maybe that's like more of the angle, but it was just funny because it's like in the middle of Montana. He's like they're like I remember they were storing like these tons of jump hoops in our little house at one time. I'm just kind of like, I guess this is what Dad and Mom are up to right now. They're making these hoops, and then he had like a camera bag thing called Focus, and so but he would design it all himself and everything like that. Eventually, he did have like one for like an IV warmer, which is basically when your IV hits your bloodstream, that it's like room temperature, and you can actually go into cardiac arrest sometimes from the shock of it. I mean, I don't think it's that common, but it's jarring nonetheless, especially like if you're in a vulnerable state where you need an actual IV, So basically it heats it up to body temperature right before it hits your bloodstream. And then, it's much more pleasant, which seems like, why doesn't that exist? And anyways, all these it was funny because they would, with each and every one of them, they're kind of like, okay, this is it. Because we grew up fairly poor and like, and had like long stretches of financial turmoil. But it was like every time it'd be like, okay, this is the big one. We're going to be millionaires. We're going to like make a shitload of money, and it's going to be, all pristine from here on out. And so it was like kind of these cycles of that in Montana, and then going into LA as we moved down here. And so they were both in both of them, at least in Montana, though they left this when they came down here and pursued other spiritual avenues. But they were also very hardcore Protestant which my dad didn't really come from, but my mom she's much more of like kind of a seeker, spiritual type. And so she locked into that. And so there was like also, and this isn't, it's a tightrope for me because they're like amazing people, but I guess I'll have to disclose a little bit, but they were like fairly, like there was moments where it'd be like, okay, well, we can just feel it with this one that we're sensing from higher entities that we're going to like get, like we're going to, this is where our destiny is going to be with this thing. And I think we're going to like do really, really well by it. So I think they had like a higher sort of like incentive with it, which, you have to have that a little bit, whether it's God or not. You got to be like, I just got to believe, I got to do this and put it out there and see what happens. So like, it's not in a judgmental way. I mean, I think it's
to do any of this. I think I say that you have to have some measure of delusion in you because you have to be like, well, there are whatever kind of like, whether you're making television or inventions or whatever, you have to be like, well, this is the even though there's like tens of thousands of other people doing this, I'm the one that's going to succeed at it. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't know how you do it without having that.
No, you have to have that. And so it's but yeah, it was interesting growing up around that. But then they would do like, it would like be at the sacrifice of like, I remember, and it's actually oddly enough, they were like actually mostly very pleasant memories. But I remember we would ride on these bikes all the time for like a long time. And then later on in life, I found out, I was like, oh yeah, they had to sell their cars because to put into this thing. And so, for like a couple of years, we were just riding bikes. And it was actually a very pleasant memory as like a 4-year-old, because I'd have the little back seat and I'd be on the back with my dad, be like, oh, this is great, we're going on the bike again. But it's kind of funny, like, being like, oh no, that like from my old brother, he's like, oh no, they were like completely broken, they had to sell all the cars and a bunch of other crap. I'm like, oh well, at least it didn't scar me in a negative way,
I think there's a level that I never, my New York story was that I sold my guitar. I had like a Jazzmaster reissue.
Oh yeah.
And I moved to New York, and then 2 weeks later, the financial crash happened.
Oh yeah.
And I come from a middle class family. My parents can't. They're like, we can't really help you. And so I sold my guitar, and that's like my one. And then I was able to find a temp job after that. But that was like my one thing. If I was screwed after that, if like nothing, if I couldn't get a temp job, then I don't know what I would have done in New York. I really. I'm sweating a little. I mean, I'm sweating.
You're sweating
because it's warm.
About it.
But like, I'm also just like, shit. I don't think I've told that as like a funny story, but then I'm like, I really. That's September.
Taps into something physical, and like, yeah. I mean, it's no joke. Those kind of like, I don't know how they did with 4 kids, like having certain moments like that. And I'm just like, and it kind of happened coming into LA as well. I'm just like, Jesus, like I get stressed out myself, maybe partially because of my upbringing. If like, I'm getting to a certain amount in my bank account, I'm like, well, then what if I lose this gig, or I don't get this thing, or what if I get, lose all these students or whatever? And it's like, then I'm fucked, right? And like my mind kind of goes in that panic mode kind of instinctually. And so I can't imagine that compounded with like a family. Oh my God. Yeah. So it's,
I mean, did your dad's ex-wife provide any stability for your half siblings?
I think he had a much more, like he was like a dean at the university, like life sciences at the University of Minnesota, I believe. And then they moved to Montana, and then they split up. So he had like a pretty steady track. He was like a super brilliant guy. He had a PhD. Well, he went to World War II at the very end of it at 17. Then
wait, your dad?
Yeah, he was 90 when he passed, and that was last year. So he was, he's up there, and he so he did that. Then got his PhD by the time he was 26, which in the 50s was pretty, quite the feat. Was a Rhodes Scholar, and then like got like a big teaching position like immediately, and then had a family like right around the same time. His first, like he was 59 when he had me. He had my half brother, the one that still lives in Montana, when he was probably, I think he was like 27. So it's like he was like doing the thing. He busted his ass. he didn't even like have a drink of alcohol till he was like 28. You know what I mean? He was like very focused and like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And so I think their marriage was fraught. I mean, I'm assuming because it didn't last, you know, but like, so, I mean, they didn't have that sort of stability, but I think as far as like a much more like kind of middle class, upper middle class kind of sort of trajectory, that's what they were brought up with. But no, I don't know. I don't talk to his former wife that much. I mean, I just never had a relationship with her.
But your half brother then is of parental age.
Oh yeah. My half sister, she was like a second mom. She was like 5 years younger than my mom, you know, and my half brother is about the same age as my mom. So
I don't know if you like,
which in like when I got older, I was like, wow, that's so okay. But it's not like, but I mean, he had a family of 4. I mean, he was very invested. It wasn't like some sort of like, yeah, he was very earnest and fell in love with this woman. So it's like, and they were together until she, you know, wanted to kind of split. And so he was very invested. So, but it is interesting as thinking back, I'm like, oh wow.
I mean, I don't know what you want to call it. I'll just call it delusion because I also suffer from it in some way. So it's not it's not pejorative, but like, were you like, oh, did you believe them when they're like, oh, this is the invention that's going to propel us to financial security? Did you believe them, or were you just like, oh no, another?
No, 100% up until a point, and then I was like, just shut the fuck up. Because like this is like, it's taxing. Like when you hear that, and then like you kind of go in these cycles. But yeah, when I was younger, they were my parents. I believed everything. You know, they were like, no, this is the thing. I'm like, oh wow, awesome. We're gonna be like millionaires. Incredible.
I mean, you know, what I mean, I think about like this is just an analogy, but like, you know, in doomsday cults, when they're just like, here's the end of the world. It's going to be September 19th, 2012. And September 19th, 2012 comes and goes, and the world doesn't end. And they're like, all right, I read the scriptures wrong. It's now it's now October 12th, 2014. And then that comes and goes. Like at some point...
It's funny. I've thought about that exact analogy before, where it's like there's like this kind of set date. Yeah, and then particularly also because they grew up Protestant, like, you know, and the apocalyptic ending scenario stuff. Like they weren't like hell ridden, like guilt trippy, like, you know, like kind of like Catholic sort of like guilt sort of tinged parenting style with like that there or whatever that wasn't infused as much with their religion, but there was. You know, the church I went to was like, you know, did talk about that stuff quite a bit. And then since then, I've, you know, just out of my own curiosity, like checked out like other cultish, you know, sort of, you know, the Branch Davidians and stuff like that, you know, like so yeah, but yeah, you get to a certain point and it's like, yeah, here's the date and the days passed. Well, actually we didn't get that quite right, but this next one for sure. And yeah, you kind of get sucked along with that. And, you know, I think, I don't know if they were trying to counteract, like, the stressors that come with, like, having to go through, like, kind of, you know, though ultimately, like, it was a fairly good childhood. And, like, I actually learned a lot that as far as, like, yeah, you know, you don't have to be... You can be pretty content with very little. In fact, most of the world has way less and their happiness rates are way higher, you know? So it's like... But yeah, I don't know if they were trying to establish some sort of security and like that. I mean, I think they really believed it too, though. So, but yeah.
I mean, I want to go back to some of this, but did you study modern composition when you went to school?
I went to school. I got obsessed with jazz, and like that's like in high school, like middle school, high school, and really got like that was like my discipline. I got into rock initially, you know, like classic rock, and then like late in high school, I got really obsessed with like kind of more modern classical stuff, but also like a huge punk rock new wave phase, and so. anything from like, early mid 70s through the mid 80s, like a lot of those, bands that you would associate with that genre. So by the time I got to school, even though I was in the jazz program, like my interests were very much like and I had always been writing music or trying to, and I love like Charles Mingus, who, even though he's a jazz player, like he melds so many different elements, that are not necessarily jazz, like from blues to classical and everything. And so like I was like, that was one of many models as far as like once I got in there. And so I did study a bit, but I didn't get a ton out of the teachers. They were mostly like 20th century rooted, like one lady in particular was like into like serialism, and like, Schoenberg kind of methodologies of writing, which
12-tone scale. Is that what that is?
Yeah. Or yeah. The 12-note rows or whatever is like, it just sounds, some of it's like really interesting, but once it became very set, like, avenue for writing music, like it just didn't register on a
it's like Duchamp
level
with the toilet with the urinal
thing. Yeah,
but it's like after that, or after the first person who does like a blank canvas, you're like, all right, well, that's done.
Cool.
It's now
exactly. Do we need 20 other things similar to this? I mean, no offense to people like that. I get there's some
offense.
Who do. But like for me, it's like it was much more like I needed stuff that like rocked my gut and my heart, and so like, but then I was interested in like Stravinsky, his ballets, like Shostakovich, Bartok, that kind of stuff. Also Ligeti was like a huge one. So as far as but I didn't really study that with anyone. I just listened to it a lot.
But I mean, I asked that because I'm curious about like if you come from a kind of like financially unstable childhood, a lot of times that pushes people into doing stable things as an adult,
right? And
it's interesting that you pushed against that and you followed kind of your interests,
right? Yeah. Well, on the other side, like my parents were like 100% supportive. Like they took out a loan to get me like a really nice guitar, and they're like, yeah, we and also my dad's twin brother was a musician, and so and then when I got into jazz, that was my dad's thing. He was a jazz fanatic, so he would just buy me CDs. He'd like, check him out. And he'd take me into Guitar Center every Sunday just to play the guitars. He found me a teacher, and they would have to pay, like, they would be like, hey, we can't pay you this week or whatever, certain times like that. And because I was so earnest, the teacher's like, don't worry about it. This kid, like, he likes doing it, which is a pleasure for me too. And so they were 100% supportive in that. And so, and like I said, it's not like, it wasn't like, rifled with like lots of like a lot of it's just what I knew. It wasn't like, I was comparing it to a different life, I was like, okay, yeah, we're eating this stuff again. Cool. That's fine. And they were very caring and nurturing in many ways. So I think that helped me feel comfortable to pursue whatever I want, as opposed to if they were jerks on top of it, I'd be like, okay, I don't have the confidence to go into this. Yeah. They did establish a good amount of confidence to pursue this stuff, which, I think a lot of people don't get that, despite them being like, maybe if you were a doctor, then, you wouldn't have to like go through all this turmoil that we've gone through or whatever. But here I am.
Yeah. I do know. Yeah. So, okay. Wait, your dad had a twin, identical twin?
Yeah. Oh, no. So,
fraternal.
Yeah. Fraternal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where was, he around ever?
Not much. It's funny. They were like, when they would get together, it was like twins. They were best friends. And they even taught at the same school in Minnesota for a while. But then once we moved to Montana, we would hardly see them, and they would talk like twice a year on the phone. Mm-hmm. That's just like their mode. I don't know why, but like, I mean, I'm kind of the same way with like friends that move out. It's like I'm not calling them every week or whatever. So I mean, I don't know, but yeah, he wasn't around that much. But yeah, fond memories of when we did get to see him. He was a wonderful. I mean, he's still around. He's a wonderful guy. But
was he similar in disposition to your dad? Like, I guess what I'm curious about, like, how genetic and how much was idiosyncratic, how much was like culturally learned of this kind of like the confidence to I'm going to put my family at peril in some way to make an invention that I to feel that strongly of like I want to make this thing in the world and sell it. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know. There's something about that is intriguing to me.
Yeah,
and I'm wondering if your uncle was like that at all. If this is like,
well, my uncle didn't have any kids, and he was a musician with Tex Beneke, Glenn Miller, who's like a big band, big band leader. He died in World War II. Tex Beneke took over his band. My uncle joined that band, was on the road for years, got burnt out as people do touring, and then he got his doctorate and started running like a program, like a jazz program at the University of Minnesota. So no, and he got married, like like when people get married at the time, and stayed with her throughout his life. So yeah, his life wasn't as much of a roller coaster, it seems like. And also he didn't have any kids, which like, I mean, like, I could like go in a crazy venture tomorrow and like, I mean, I'm savvy enough, like I'm not, I could get a job and stay at a cheap room somewhere, at a friend's house. And so, yeah, it's like, it's different from that. So I don't know his story as well either, really, to know like, or him personally enough to like really know if there's a comparison to draw from as far as their, how they approached their creative endeavors. But
I mean, it does seem like I don't know if if your uncle didn't have children out of that. I mean, Naomi and I, we don't really want to have kids.
Mm-hmm. I don't either.
And partly it's like we live in a nightmare, and
that's part of it for me as well.
The world's not going to get better. Also, like, we live somewhat. What's the word I'm looking for? What's the like an earthquakey kind of like when you're a freelancer, you don't necessarily know where your next paycheck's coming from.
No, yeah.
And so the idea of like having kids and doing that kind of stuff is terrifying to us.
Especially like the cost of living too. I mean, I think it's like 20 years ago, you could, in LA, you could do that. You could like, or at least have a little bit more stability in it. And it's like, oh, at least I don't have to pay like $2,000 a month for rent, or whatever, or like whatever it might cost, like as it does now, or can cost now. So
does,
I mean, by and large. Yeah. So so, I mean, I think that's a factor in it for a lot of people as well. It's just it's more expensive now than it used to be everywhere, to live.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I guess you could still like labor under the delusion of like, this is I can do this thing that's kind of shaky and have kids because the economy is so good.
Yeah, right. And he did have a trade in place. He was a teacher, and eventually when I was about 15, when we moved back here, they were kind of like, because we moved down here because my mom had a store in the old Hollywood, or it's still around, the one by the Grove, the Hollywood Farmers Market, the original one, the kind of, yeah. And that folded in a year, and then they were like, okay, they tried some shit for like a year or so, and then he was like, okay, I need to go back teaching because this is getting nuts. And now we're in LA, which is much more expensive than Kalispell, Montana was. So he did go back to teaching, and end up at ELAC, East Los Angeles Community College, till, he couldn't teach anymore. So, yeah, it's, what was the,
I was saying that like, through the instability.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I guess that, yeah, he had a trade in place to where eventually, and he did rely on it. So to kind of, because I think after they came down here and that business closed down, they were like, okay, this is getting too nuts. But then they did the IV warmer thing, which actually was a pretty great idea, but it didn't amount to anything either.
Oh.
But they had other investors for that. It's like people like, I don't know exactly what
It
happened.
wasn't just
him.
like him putting up like the third mortgage on the house.
Right. And he always had other people like, pulling money into it as well. But there was like, it was also him like kind of trying to, I don't know the details exactly. I just know there was like these bouts of like, financially unstable moments. And then from my older siblings, they were in conjunction with like, these.
This failed.
Because I was also the youngest one too. And so it's like, I think it was a little bit easier for me, because like I was like the last one they would probably like, at least at that age, disclose like some sort of like that sort of information to,
Right.
So I heard like a lot of it, like it was from my siblings or whatever. And so,
I mean, were they depressed around the house? Like I'm in my head, I'm imagining like like a 1950, like a salesman type feeling.
No, not at all. My dad was not a depressed person.
And your mom had a kind of like religious optimism that kind of floated
and
her.
even when she wasn't religious, she was. Yeah, no, it was very loving and very like optimistic and very like, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't a depressing household, so that was nice.
And there's that Protestant work ethic that I think seems to undergird all of this.
And also, he's from North Dakota and born in 1927. He would like hunt like their dinner in the morning before going to school. like shoot birds. And then his mom would cook it and they'd have it for dinner. So no, he worked his ass off, and he was like, his body was like giving out, and it's like, okay, you should not be working more. And he worked for like another 6 years, like, and he would like had his cane. He was like, and then even when he was like, okay, definitely you're not going back to work ever again, he's like, no, I'm going to go back to work. And because he loved doing it as well, he loved teaching, and which is odd that he stopped. I think the academia stuff got to him, like because he was a dean. And I know he was very outspoken, very opinionated, and so I think he like kind of like ruffled some feathers, and he was kind of like, "Fuck this! I don't like this aspect of it. I'm gonna do something different."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it wasn't like a depressing household, and his work ethic was like also probably of a man of that era. It's like, no, suck it up, keep that shit down, and like he never wore his feelings on his sleeve, at least, and he. I'm out of respect for him not talking about like as much about his bad behavioral aspects, which every parent has,
Sure.
But like, so there was that too. But like, by and large, when I was younger, he wasn't. He was like very cool, and like, didn't wear his financials, like burdens on his sleeve and as much. But it still came across, but
right. I mean, at what point did you start to get keyed into this stuff? Like that it wasn't all a kind of rosy picture.
Well, I was like, there was a book fair that came to Montana it was once a year, and it would be for a week, and the gymnasium was covered with books and all that stuff. You remember? Yeah. And so I was like, oh, the book fair is here, and there's this book I want, and it was $2. And like Monday, I'm like, can I have $2 to get the book? And they're like, you have to ask tomorrow. We'll maybe by tomorrow we can do it. And that happened every day. And then Friday came the last day. I was like, can I get the $2? Do we have it? She's like, no, we don't have it. And so that's when I was like, oh, fuck, we're broke. And then also once you get into middle school, and like then like your peers start kind of like, they'll be like, it's like, dude, you've been wearing the same shoes for like why don't you get the new shit? I'm like, well, I don't know. There's like, or they're like, oh, those are Payless shoes, aren't they? So once you get into the bullying sort of stuff, then
yeah. And
also I went to a middle school that was like in South Pasadena. We lived in the studio apartment there, and then the and I don't mean to be talking. My childhood wasn't that bad at all. But,
right. I don't think you're painting that picture either. I am just. What I'm curious about is how these things influence you,
right?
And then influence you to make the art you make,
right.
Because I do, and I don't think we talk about the financial aspect of our childhoods enough. I don't think we talk about class enough in this country.
Yeah,
and so you're going. So you're in South Pasadena.
Yeah, and so there it's like an upper middle class area, and so there it's like, oh, you want to come over? He's like, yeah, and they go to my studio apartment. It's like, where do you sleep? I'm like, I sleep in the walk-in closet, and there's like, they're like, dude, what the fuck? And then then they tell kids at school, and they're like, dude, you sleep in a fucking closet or whatever, stuff like that. So but that was more so of that age group too, when like. Kids turn to assholes. They're like, whatever, 13, it was like 13, 14. And so then I became much more aware of it. I was like, oh, wow. But like in Montana, not as much. And then when we moved down here, we had to move a good amount because like the first place we moved was Park La Brea in these apartments. And Park La Brea is a nice area. It's like near Hancock Park,
Oh, okay.
And we were there a year, and they're like, okay, we're going out. And then we moved to Highland Park, which is actually where I live now. But it was much a different neighborhood back then. And we lived on the top floor of this woman's house, and then that shit went down with that. And then we moved to South Pasadena because also the school district it's a good school district, and we got a studio apartment. And then like a bunch, like my oldest sister was out of the house at that point. And so, but the three of us and them crammed in this apartment, and eventually my brother left too. So it was like, but it was still like fairly like it was much more like clear. I was like, oh wow, we're like kind of like flying by the seat of our pants here,
Yeah. I mean, do you think
it's also the age of like being aware of that too? Because like when you're younger, you kind of just going with it, and I guess it's not like I wasn't as conscious of it either.
Do you think this also like this is something that kind of like earlier I was saying like I think I said this on mic. There has to be some kind of otherness. I think to make good art or interesting art, you have to have some kind of otherness in you. Do you think that like being conscious of your class is and coming from like a kind of working class background is the thing that, or is besides also like I think the household you grew up in is somewhat unique, and I think liking jazz in a world where I didn't understand jazz until I got to college, and then there were I'm at the radio station and they're like, no, jazz isn't just like something that's played at like the cocktail hour of a bar mitzvah. It's right. Like there's it's like here's a lot of like great here's first of all, here's all the people from the 70s, here's the European free jazz, here's all this, and you're like right. Oh, okay, so there's a lot more interesting stuff out there. I think being keyed into these things, I think all of these things together are something that like push you apart from the mass of people.
Totally, yeah. It's weird. I haven't drawn that connection. I guess I haven't thought about it a ton of how it affects like. I mean, I don't know why I locked into jazz. It just made sense at a certain point. It was like bebop era stuff, and later I got into like punk rock stuff. And there's like just I think it's the energy of it, but also the actual solos and like in that stuff like from that era, and then into Coltrane and eventually Ornette Coleman, all that stuff. It sounded like language to me. It sounded like very poetic, and it made complete sense. Like, oh, it almost sounded like a different like way of talking. It was like very like it wasn't not obviously with words, but it just clicked in. So, but yeah, so I guess like I locked into that, but then I would also read a lot of those biographies of those people too. And, I'm trying to think of like, I'm trying to draw some sort of connection to how it would affect. I mean,
it doesn't have to be necessarily, but I'm just saying like, I think these things like one, like, being working class in a wealthy area is a thing that kind of like separates you from other people.
Well, I think what resulted in that is I was isolated with friends as well because of that. Like there was like a fair amount of like ostracizing that happened because I was also still kind of new to the city, and like and I had long hair because I was like really, and like I was into like whatever rock at the time before I got into the jazz stuff, and so it got me obsessed with like just music, because I'd go home and I would just like I would just practice and like get and read books about it and get completely engulfed with it. Cause I wasn't like going out, and doing shit with people afterwards. So I think, that affected as far as like aesthetically how it manifested. I think like, I don't know. It's like, I think I'm always like looking just to get excited about something. And so once you run through the usual gauntlet of like, of art or whatever, like you're seeking kind of the next thing. You're wanting to get your mind blown, At least I was. I also admittedly smoked a ton of pot and like did lots of psychedelics as a teenager. So maybe that affected why I do some of the music I do now. But and so I'm not quite sure.
Was that easy to get? I mean, I'm still a teetotaler. Like I said, I don't know how many times I've said this on the show before, but like an Advil PM really knocks me out. Yeah. And it
I
seems
had a
like
brother
people
4 years older than me who was like kind of my into like all that musically speaking as well. Because actually, he was my first into like. My first obsessive wave of music fandom was like through him and the music he was listening to. And then years later, he's the first one that got me stoned. He's the first one that I did, mushrooms with and stuff like that. So I think having the brother who was into that stuff already, who you looked up to, you kind of, I was kind of running in that path a little bit.
It just seems like people in Los Angeles partied harder in their teen years than people in Pennsylvania.
Or maybe, I don't know, nowadays it seems like, a lot of middle towns are, I don't know if it's partying, maybe they're just like numbing themselves out, but like there's...
Well, let's forget the opioid crisis. Yeah, okay. But I just meant like when I was a kid, again, I mentioned that I'm a teetotaler mostly because I'm like, I was not keyed into this stuff then. But I think people like maybe like, got drunk or smoked pot. Maybe.
Well, it's much more available here. It's like at least with pot. I don't know how much of that would have happened if we were in Kalispell, Montana still, though I'm sure a fair amount still would get up there. But yeah, especially because it's closer to Canada, so maybe from there. So I think region has a lot to do with it,
Okay, so we're at the end. I'm just let's just recap some stuff, just to see if we got it all. Dad, academic and inventor. Mom, Protestant, very religious. What happened when she moved here? Did she lose her?
She did, and she got into Christian Scientist stuff. Then she got really heavy into astrology. Now she's pretty much agnostic, atheist identified, and like she's super smart, and she just like, I think she was just looking for some sort of security, like existentially, and my dad was too a bit, but she kind of ran the show a good amount as well, and so. Yeah, so by the time she got here, and she was also helping my dad with these endeavors, and her business is why we came down here. And so she was partaking in that as well too, but also a mom of 4, and doing that. So, but yeah, but she kind of ran through these cycles of spiritual endeavors, and then now it's like burnout on it all, I guess.
Sure, after a while, if you don't find the thing you're looking for.
Yeah.
Then I don't know what.
It's also what's available in Kalispell at the time. There wasn't the internet, so it wasn't like you could really discover stuff yourself. So it's like, well, here's the big ass church, and this is what everyone else is going to. So that could have been like, you're raising kids, and like, that's the communal center as well, And so it was spiritual, but maybe also like a community as well. And there's good people that they met through there, and so. But yeah, now she came here and tried a few other activities, and now is like doesn't do any of it.
I mean, is that the thing that attracted them to each other? They both seem to have like some kind of like optimism, some kind of like faith optimism, whether it's like a religious faith or not. It's just some kind of like.
I don't know. I don't know what in the early years what brought them together, but it was like quick. It was like boom. Oh, this is my soulmate of sorts, and so, but yeah.
And then, were you an adult already when they got divorced?
They 16. So my that's when it got rocking. By the time 17, she left, and so not super young, but like it was like a big shift because like here's this like pristine like this they're like as tight as any two people can be, and then so seeing that was kind of like whoa. And then I went to school right after that too, so which maybe was a good thing because I was like, okay, well I'm busy with doing my own shit, but yeah. And then she came back and helped out with stuff as my dad was getting older and getting sick, and so she's but she had to kind of she was also very young when she was like early 20s, and spent her whole life having kids, and then like I think she kind of wanted like to see what else was out there, after all the kids were grown up, which you hear about a lot, that's a lot, at least I have, where the kids are out of the house, and now it's like, okay, well I don't want to be a roommate anymore.
How do you feel? Good,
bad? Yeah. No, I feel good. I've done a few like little music driven podcasts, but I listened to a few yours, and so I was like nervous like about like talking about like trying to source through memories or whatever. But I felt like this flowed pretty good. I was like, oh, I didn't know it's going to talk about like my like the spiritual stuff of my parents at all,
Yeah. I mean, I think that part is interesting. I think it
is. Yeah.
I haven't put it together exactly yet, but I think it does set the scene for you as a person.
For sure. Yeah. I believe that as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming over.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.